Okay, let's move to Africa and Asia now to conclude this summary of this book, which is obviously very brief. I'm just taking a very small part and the most relevant for the continuity of this course on adaptation principles and implementation. China is the world's leading emitter of GHG emissions. Since 1990, emissions have risen 80%, with heavy coal use being a determining factor. China is very aggressive on economic growth and will generate energy in whatever way it can, also deploying enormous amounts of renewables, of course. China did ratify Paris Agreement in 2016, and it is on target to meet CO2 emissions between 2025 and 2030, which is an essential part of its NDC commitment. The targets set in NDC, which include the target to peak CO2 emissions by 2030 at the latest, lower the carbon intensity of GDP by 60% to 65%, below the 2005 levels by 2030, increase the share of non-fossil energy carriers of the total energy supply to around 20% by that time, and increase its forest stock volume by 4.5 billion cubic meters compared to the 2005 levels. China has become much greener, according to satellite data that are reported. Total GHG emissions are likely to continue increasing until 2030, as China has not yet implemented sufficient policies addressing non-CO2 GHG emissions, methane, nitrous oxide, HCFCs, etc., which we have discussed elsewhere. This indicates a need for further action in this area, and it is encouraging that NDC acknowledges that addressing these gases is important. Few points. In 2016, the Chinese government officially approved its 13th five-year plan for economic and social development for 2016-2020, and it includes reductions in water use, energy use, CO2 emissions of 23%, 15%, and 18% respectively by 2020. We can go and check it for progress. With air pollution being the leading cause of fatalities in China, there is an important goal to have good air quality, defined as the density of fine particle matter on at least 80% of the days in a year by 2020. China has made tremendous progress on reducing pollution, but it's still got a long way. But this is true for India as well, and many other countries, including many places in the US. President Xi Jinping set a national goal to cap CO2 emissions by 2030 and to reduce emissions of CO2 per unit of GDP by 60 to 65% from the 2005 levels, as we said. 2007, China announced its first national climate change plan, and it ratified UNFCCC in 1993. Quickly moving to Africa, I think Japan was included in the other one, so forget what I said about, and Thailand was, so I don't know why I moved China here. In 2016, Kenya ratified Paris Agreement. Climate Change Act provides regulatory framework for an enhanced response to climate change and a mechanism and measures to achieve low carbon climate development. The government also established the National Climate Change Council, chaired by President of Kenya. Government has set a target of universal access to electricity, currently at 55% by 2020, so we have to check on this. In general, development goal and access to electricity and water are also consistent with adaptation and resilience. Mitigation, I don't know, I'm stumbling this. Mitigation strategy has set a 30% emissions reduction by 2030. 2013 National Drought Management Authority bill was drafted to establish the National Disaster Management Agency. Government projects a 20% growth in the solar photovoltaic sector, leading to a 10 megawatt capacity generating 22 gigawatt hours annually by 2020. Solar power use goals include the installation of at least 350,000 solar water heating units by 2017 and a goal of 100 megawatt from solar power by 2017, 200 megawatt by 2022, and 500 megawatt for 2030, which is similar to India's goals. There is a government target of wind power capacity increase of 500 megawatts, so 500,000, 3,000 by 2030. Biogas for Better Life program sets target of 5,000 biodigesters, 6,500 and 10,000 by 2030. So I don't know if that's all being met, since we are already in 2023. In 2010, the Ministry for Environment and Mineral Resources launched the National Climate Change Response Strategy, complemented by the 2013-17 Climate Change Action Plan. In 2010, a new constitution was adopted. From an environmental and health perspective, Article 43 is significant as it guarantees the right to the highest sustainable standard of health, the right to accessible and adequate housing, the right to adequate food of acceptable quality, and the right to clean and safe water. The right to a clean and healthy environment is codified in 42. I have a breeze picking up, hopefully not too bad so far on the sound. Other articles ensure sustainable resource use and exploitation and equitable sharing of the accruing benefits, and establish systems of environmental impact assessment, environmental audit, and monitoring of the environment. Kenya ratified Kyoto Protocol in 2005 and even FCCC in 94. Moving to South Africa, in Africa, Science and Paris Agreement, 2016 South Africa signs Paris Agreement. Constitution of the Republic of South Africa National Environmental Management Act is established. National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act, 2008 National Biodiversity Framework, National Environmental Management Air Quality Act, National Environmental Management Protected Areas Act, National Environmental Management Integrated Coastal Management Act, National Environmental Management Waste Act. So there's a lot of regulations set up. Hopefully enforcement is good as well. Other acts: National Water Act, Forest Act, Kyoto Protocols signed in 2002, White Paper on Integrated Pollution Waste Management for South Africa in 2000, White Paper on Environmental Management Policy in 98, White Paper on Energy Policy of the Republic in 98, White Paper on the Promotion of Renewable Energy and Clean Energy in 97, so that's way back, it's a good sign. UNFCCC signature in 93, ratification in 97, Vienna Convention accession in 1990, and Montreal Protocol in 1990 as well. I'm just running through these because you can go and read them in the book or follow up with other papers that are reporting on the progress of these things, which I'm not doing here. Botswana ratified Paris Agreement in 16. 15, it committed to reducing overall carbon emissions by 15% by 2030 in their commitment. 2015 to 2030, the government of Botswana initiated 6 important sustainable goals over a 15-year time period as follows. So this is always important to track development, adaptation, and synergy with sustainable development goals. Improving agricultural productivity and farmers' incomes, building resilience and mitigation efforts, value chain, research for development innovation, improving agriculture advisory support services, and improved institutional coordination. Fantastic for a small country. Yes. Kyoto Protocol was ratified in 2003, UNFCCC in 94, Declaration of Forest Reserves in 86, Atmospheric Pollution Act in 1971. Moving back to Asia, in 2016, India ratified the Paris Agreement, has been very active on the global stage. The innovations and adaptation strategies to increase the share of non-fossil based power generation capacity to 40% of installed electric power capacity by 2030. That's a part of its NDCs as well, and government goals. By 2020, to reduce the emissions intensity of GDP by 20% to 25% by below the 2005 level. So it's not absolute, but intensity. To increase the solar ambition of the government's national solar mission to 100 gigawatts installed capacity by 2022. To have solar power in every home by 2019 and invest in 25 solar parks. In 2023, I can tell you solar energy is not in every home, but the investment in solar parks has been going great. Raise wind energy production from 50,000 to 60,000 megawatts by 2022. It's in the 12th five-year plan, which got changed into some other name by now, Niti Aayog. Prime Minister Modi announced a goal of 100 sustainable smart cities, which is going on, but not sure they are sustainable. Provide electricity to 25% of the population by 2020 2002, which has happened. 2008, Prime Minister Singh released India's first national action plan on climate change. The electricity access for people from below 50% to near 100% was done the fastest in India compared to China, the UK, and so on. Back to Africa, sorry for mishmashing these. Egypt signed the Paris Agreement. 2005 Law 9 is promulgated. It's an amendment and update to 94 Environmental Law 4, which addresses the protection of environment and a national action plan. 2009, the Climate Change Risk Management Program is launched. 2008, the Ministry of Interior enacted Traffic Law number 121 of 2008, which directs that all passenger transport vehicles like taxis, buses, and microbuses more than 20 years old will not be permitted to renew their operating license effective August 1, 2008. They are fuel inefficient, high emissions, so get rid of them. 2005, Egypt ratified the Kyoto Protocol, was signed in 1999. 2005, sorry, the wind is strong. Egyptian designated National Authority for Clean Development Mechanism is established. 99, Egypt's Climate Change Action Plan is established. 99, initial national communication on climate change is initiated. The Interministerial National Climate Change Committee is launched by the Egyptian government in 97. 94, it had signed the UNFCCC, ratified that. Okay, let me close the window because now it's picking up, the wind is picking up. Okay, sorry about that. The wind is obviously very comfortable for living without the AC, but then the recording can get really disrupted by it. Okay, Israel ratified the Paris Agreement, and the government approved a plan to reduce GHG emissions and raise energy efficiency. They have targeted reduction per capita GHG emissions to 7.7 tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030, which will translate to a 26% change from emissions in 2005. So this is an absolute commitment. They have committed, of course, to the UNFCCC. 2015, Israeli cabinet approved government decision that set a national per capita GHG emissions reduction target of 8.8 tons of CO2 equivalent by 2025 and 7.7 tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. So this includes non-CO2 greenhouse gases when we say CO2 equivalent, which I have explained elsewhere. You can look up. Included in the decision are the following targets: 17% reduction in electricity consumption by 2030. 17% of the electricity generated in 2030 will be from renewable sources. In 2017, approximately 3% of the electricity was generated by renewables. 2011, the Ministry of Environmental Protection established the Israel Climate Change Information Center. 2009, the government approved decision to appoint interministerial committee to address issues related to environmental protection and climate change adaptation. Further, 2009, the government approved a decision to establish a strategic plan for climate change adaptation. 2007, National Water Desalination Plant was launched with the goal to expand natural water resources by 35%. I know that this has happened and is successful. 2006, the Ministry of Environmental Protection established an interministerial steering committee with the goal of advancing recommendations on climate change adaptation. 2002, the In 2002, the National Master Plan was created to address the severe water shortage crisis facing the country. So if you read forward, you will get the sense. UNFCCC was ratified in 1996. We are here at which country now? So by removing the information, I lose that. So here we are talking about Greece, I think, if I'm not mistaken. This is Jordan, sorry, we're still in the Middle East. Paris Agreement signed in 2016, 2016-25 National Water Strategy, which is a great problem for them. They have good agreements with Israel. Core elements of the strategy include water sector capital investment program, water demand management policy, energy efficiency and renewable energy in the water sector, water substitution and reuse, water reallocation, surface water utilization, groundwater sustainability, climate change policy for resilient water sector, decentralized wastewater management, and action plan to reduce water sector losses. 2015 intended nationally determined contributions submitted. Third national communication on climate change happened in 2014. Going back, 13 climate change adaptation and low emission development strategy developed. Second national communication on climate change in 2009. 2008 to 2022 Water for Life, Jordan's water strategy. National strategy and climate action plan to combat desertification. First national communication on climate change. Government National Environmental Action Plan in '96. That's way back. Looking here at UK, so we're moving into Europe. 2017, UK had a policy paper, so climate change risk assessment. UK is quite progressive on climate action. Paris Agreement in 2016, Climate Change Scotland Act 2009, goals for Scotland to meet 42% reduction in emissions by 2020 and yearly reductions between 2010 and 2050. So each year they will plan to reduce emissions. Low Carbon Transition Plan sets forth the procedures for attaining carbon reductions as required under Climate Change Act. Target is to reduce emissions by more than 33% in order to meet the 2020 reduction. So that's 34% below the 1990 climate baseline, so emissions baseline. Climate Change Act, renewable energy strategy, climate investment funds established by the World Bank to providing funding to support projects and targets in developing countries. So funds are contributed by 14 donor countries with UK, Australia, Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Japan, Korea, and the Netherlands, as well as Norway, Spain, Switzerland, Sweden, and the USA. In 2016, $8.3 billion in pledged donations were reserved for projects such as renewable energy, green efficiency, sustainable transportation, and climate resilience programs in 72 pilot nations. So the green, there are various instruments that we have discussed elsewhere. Moving forward to which country is this? This is Greece. Yes. Sorry, I really should have put the country names prominently. So it's mentioned somewhere. That's why I get lazy. So this is just EU, is it? Okay, let's just read and then we'll figure it out. National Adaptation Plan signed in 2017, Paris Agreement in 2016, National Communication on USFCC, so that's not EU, that's Italy. Italy has a reduction of GHG emissions target of 13% by 2020 based on 2005 emissions. The goal is codified in their law by 2010. Target set in the EU 2020 Climate Change and Energy Package adopted in 2009. 2030 commitment, 40% domestic reduction in emissions below the 1990 levels by 2030 to be fulfilled jointly by EU member states. 13% reduction in domestic emissions below 2005 levels by 2020 in accordance with their decision under the European Parliament and Council. Project MOSE initiated to erect a storm surge barrier that could close Lagoon of Venice during high flood periods in the Adriatic Sea, which seems to be working because it's been tested a few times already. It's a sitting duck with rising sea levels and warming and the tourist traffic, water withdrawals, and so on. A fund for GHG emissions reduction and energy efficiency is set up to address the reduction of atmospheric emissions and to encourage energy efficiency and sustainable energy sources. So they signed and ratified UNFCCC in '94. Excuse me. This is definitely Greece. got a dry throat. Paris Agreement signed. First national strategy for adapting to climate change was initiated. Providing renewable energy incentives, primarily addressing wind power, photovoltaic systems, hydroelectric, solar, geothermal, and biomass. They provide funding opportunities for environmental initiatives and support the Green Fund. Support for the Green Fund, which receives support from tax revenues, the EU, and other donation sources. Regulation on taxes with different categories of vehicles to encourage low emissions. Hybrid and low emissions vehicles are exempt from these taxes, so incentives. There is a directive to provide compensation to carbon-intensive industries exposed to carbon leakage caused by indirect costs of the EU emission trading policy. So, being a part of EU, they are of course forced to follow certain EU regulations which amount to their own contribution to climate action. There is a law to promote initiatives to introduce energy efficiency into buildings. Under the law, energy performance certificates are compulsory for all new buildings. The law also provides for studies and licensing procedures for buildings to include a study on passive solar system, heating, cooling, electricity production systems that utilize renewable energy. In 2005, Central Water Agency was established. Its goal is to develop national water policy for Greece. There is a law that promotes the introduction of biofuels and other renewable fuels into the Greek economy. Okay, so I kind of rushed through both the podcast a little bit, but mostly making some simple points about how countries have been proactive on setting up regulations, incentives, agencies, institutions, government funding, international funding, etc. for innovation and adaptation strategy development over time. And as opposed to mitigation, for which we keep looking at the emissions growth, for adaptation we need those indices, metrics, etc. to track the resilience being increased and vulnerability being decreased and so on, which obviously is not done comprehensively, but if there is any report or book that reports on those, then I'll go ahead and put those into this section on new findings in adaptation as well. Okay.